Hello and welcome to a presentation on the Hillcrest redevelopment plan. I'm Andrew Dresner, an urban designer and planner at Cunningham Group. I'm working for the City of St. Paul on this important project. Cunningham Group is leading the master plan effort. However, we are working closely with the city staff and the Community Advisory Committee. The purpose of this presentation is to give you background and to present you two finalist scenarios. Over the course of this video, I'll touch briefly on what this master plan is about, who is involved, why it's important, what the process is, what we know about the site, and how that knowledge informs the two finalist scenarios. Then I'll present to you the scenarios, and we recognize that neither of these two scenarios is absolutely perfect. They have trade-offs. The purpose is to present the approaches and to elicit feedback from you so we can better understand what is most important to the community. The level of information that I'll present to you is general overview, and we invite you to dive deeper into any of these topics by spending time with the finalist scenario document that is available online. The master plan will have several components to it. It'll show where on the site different uses occur. It will describe how the site will be integrated with its surroundings. It'll have text as well as a section on sustainability, housing, and zoning details. And the master plan will be a refinement of the city's comprehensive plan. It'll give greater detail to those broad policies that are contained in that document, many of which you have participated in creating several years ago. The project is being led by the City of St. Paul, and it is being guided by an 11-member Community Advisory Committee. And you can see the names there on the right. We've been meeting with them monthly throughout the process, and the project is also being supported by a technical advisory committee, approximately 25 members from the city, the county, the watershed district, and other organizations that will have a role in implementation. It's important to note the site is owned by the St. Paul Port Authority, and they purchased the site in 2019 with the intent to develop it with a mix of uses. And finally, the project will be informed and developed for you, the public. So we are past the halfway point in the project. And in the last summer, we developed 4 basic approaches. We presented them to you in August. We combined the best ideas from those approaches, and today we will be presenting 2 finalist scenarios. The master plan document will be written throughout the spring and the summer, and we anticipate a pair of formal public hearings in the fall and winter before the master plan is officially adopted by the St. Paul City Council. Okay, so where is the site? The site is located at the corner of McKnight and Larpenteur Avenue at the northeast corner of the city. It's approximately 112 acres, which is approximately the same size as the Ford site. It's also located at the high point of Ramsey County, thus the name Hillcrest. Importantly, it is also part of larger systems that have influenced the development of the site over centuries. It's part of a watershed with hydrology that feeds the aquifer in nearby lakes and streams. It's also part of a savanna in which certain plant and animal species thrive, and is part of a migratory bird flyway. So what do we know about the site and what are some of its features? Today, the site is unused and it is being prepared for development. It's still the high point in the county, as indicated by the 2 plus signs on the map on the right. It has mature trees, wetlands, and ponds indicated in blue. It has rolling topography, some natural, some man-made. It generally slopes from the high point to a low point about 80 feet lower in the southeast corner of the site. The soils on the south portion of the site are conducive to stormwater infiltration because they are sandy, but that is less so the case on the northern portion of the site. It's also important to note that while the site may appear natural and green, it is also a heavily contaminated site. The soils along the former fairways and greens and tee boxes all have mercury contamination, which must be removed. This excavation is necessary to prepare the land for redevelopment and will likely result in the loss of many of the mature trees. Earlier, I mentioned that the site is part of several large natural systems, such as the watershed and the flyway. It's also part of several man-made systems, such as transportation, parks, and land use. This redevelopment plan will be integrated into those systems. Trails and sidewalks will extend through the site, intersections will align across McKnight and Larpenteur, and transit will be extended to and possibly through the site. By integrating these systems into the redevelopment of the site, we can design a place that is not an island. We can design a place that is woven into the daily lives of the community. So what are some of the city and property owner priorities for this project? These priorities were established through the comprehensive plan, as well as the ordinance that enabled the purchase of the land. To ensure project viability, there is a target of around 1,000 jobs, 1,000 new housing units, and 20 acres of open space, of which 5 acres will be an active park with an athletic field, playground, and other programmable spaces. The remainder of the open space will be trail space, wetlands, passive park space, and buffer space around the wetlands. The ordinance requires land sales to be the primary driver for funding infrastructure. Therefore, it is important for the plan to create land value. This condition protects the taxpayers from funding basic infrastructure. Per the comprehensive plan, the project should also contain a neighborhood node. Neighborhood node generates activity through shared and overlapping uses. It's a community gathering place where residents from within and beyond the development come to recreate, work, live, and gather. The quiet nature of the existing neighborhoods on both sides of the development. Also, the community would like to see a range of housing options on the site, traditional and non-traditional housing types, including townhouses, apartments, and senior housing. Even extended family housing, cooperative housing, and maybe even tiny house clusters. We also heard from the community that they would like to see adequate and appropriate open spaces throughout the site to serve new residents. The rolling topography and mature trees are a feature of the site that should be incorporated as much as possible. And the community emphasized the importance of smart transportation connections. They want trails extended into and through the site, and they want the site to be accessible by foot, by bike, and by transit. But care must be given to how the western and southern edges of the site are designed to avoid excessive traffic or speeding through the surrounding neighborhoods. The two finalist scenarios you'll see later in this presentation layer the community, technical, policy priorities on top of the existing site conditions and system connections. As noted previously, neither of these scenarios are going to be perfect. They represent different ways to accomplish the priorities by arranging buildings, spaces, and infrastructure on the site. As we develop these two finalist scenarios, 4 primary challenges emerged. The first is related to the city policy of connectivity and the community priority of maintaining a quiet community. The second is about the eastern edge or the McKnight edge of the site. As you may recall, that edge is defined today by wetlands and mature tree growth. However, that edge is also valued by development for its visibility, access, and proximity to McKnight Road. The third challenge relates to the existing site conditions, which has quite a bit of topography and the need to develop pad-ready sites that are relatively flat. And finally, as with all projects, we want to create a strong sense of place. Sense of place is important because unique identity is essential to long-term competitiveness and value of the site. We create sense of place by celebrating and leveraging the qualities of a place that are special, the site features, its people, and its culture. The images on the left are from Stillwater. The river, the bluff, the old buildings, and the businesses there all come together to create a strong sense of place. The middle images show a place that highlights innovative use of stormwater and daylighting a creek. When we don't create a strong sense of place, we often resort to things like putting clock towers on corners. The problem to this approach to creating a sense of place is someone can always build a bigger clock tower. So we are going to try to avoid that approach at Hillcrest. You'll recall in the summer, we presented 4 approaches to the site. They ranged from a gentle intervention to a significant intervention. Since the summer, we've learned quite a bit more about site features and technical considerations, and that has brought us to 2 finalist approaches. One is called the Hilltop, and one is called Jobs Focus. As we present these scenarios, we ask that you pay particular attention to how they address community priorities, as well as the challenges and tensions that I discussed a few slides prior. I'll discuss some of them as I explain the approaches, but as I also mentioned, we encourage you to dive more deeply into these items through the online document at your convenience. A final note before introducing the finalist scenarios. Both of them have a mix of uses, but they will vary between them. They each have employment uses that will be shown in purple. They each will have housing, which will be shown in yellow to dark orange. And they both will have active space, park space. Sorry, let's do this one again. Take 3. Sorry, Brett. Okay. A final note before introducing the finalist scenarios. They each will have a mix of uses, but the mix and the amounts will vary slightly between the 2 scenarios. They'll each have employment uses that will be shown in purple. They each will have housing that will be in yellows and oranges. And they both will have open space, which will be shown in greens and blues. And that will include active parks, passive parks, and wetlands. And then finally, they both will have a neighborhood node. And I discussed that earlier before. On this slide, you can see a few images that describe what some of these uses may look like. You're encouraged, however, to consider the qualitative aspects of how these land uses can contribute to a better east side. So for example, the purple land use is not just a building. It represents living wage jobs. And the green is not just a park. It is a place to gather, to relax, and exercise. So as you review these plans, we encourage you to take into account those qualitative aspects as well. On this slide, you can see the 2 finalist designs side by side. The Hilltop is on the left and the Jobs Focus on the right. They share many qualities, such as a north-south spine road, connections to Winthrop on the west edge, and connections to McKnight Road that will align with existing intersections. They both have parks and green space, as well as a community node at the north end of the site. I'll now take you through each of these 2 sites with a little more detail. We'll discuss some of the defining features, and then we'll look at the site from a series of different vantage points in the sky. I'll point out some features, and then I'll show you how each of the plans measures up against the targets and the priorities that were discussed earlier. To start off, I'm going to reorient you to this site. We are now rotated to the north and we're looking south, hovering above Larpenteur Avenue. This is the existing conditions with a few of those existing features pointed out. The high point, the location of wetlands outlined in white, and then some of the more significant mature trees in yellow. Now you see the Hilltop alternative drawn into the site. In general, the Hilltop alternative does as the name suggests. It preserves a hilltop on the northern portion of the site, and it becomes the defining feature of the site. The hilltop rises about 40 or 50 feet. It is adjacent to an active park. It will become a place to enjoy long views across and beyond the site, as well as a sledding hill or a rolling hill in the summer. It's surrounded by medium density housing, perhaps some with retail shops or restaurants on the ground floor. The north-south spine road will bend around the hill and then connect south to Ivy, becoming the address for light industrial development. The McKnight Road frontage is shared with wetlands, trails, and a few industrial buildings. A note, though, about these three-dimensional illustrations. We could see a range of building types, styles, and sizes. They just illustrate what could plausibly be built under these alternatives. They are just illustrative. So now I'm going to rotate around the site so we can look at the edges. This view takes us down lower, still looking south. You can see the road bending around the hill. In general, the housing in the node will be between 3 and 6 stories. So first, the hilltop scenario. You see the hilltop alternative drawn into the site from that same vantage point. The hilltop scenario does as the name suggests. It preserves the hilltop on the northern portion of the site, and it becomes the defining feature of the site. The hilltop rises about 40 or 50 feet, and it is adjacent to the active park. It becomes an important feature of the site because from the top of it, you can have long views across the site or across the city. In the foreground, you see the community node, which is defined primarily by medium density housing. We can expect the community node to have a small amount of retail and restaurants within it. The actual amount will be limited in the master plan. And then you can also see the north-south spine road entering the site from the north and curling around the hill and connecting to Ivy at the top of the site. I'm going to now take us through a sequence or a series of vantage points rotating around the site. Each of the vantage points we will look at first from the hilltop, and then we will do the other scenario. It's important to note that these are just illustrative and that they indicate what could be developed on the site, but they are not, buildings haven't been designed and landscape hasn't been designed. So what they illustrate is the overall arrangement of buildings, open space, and land use. So the first view I will take us to simply drops us a little bit lower. We're now hovering just above Larpenteur Avenue. And you can see directly in front of us is the spine road. It will enter the site from Larpenteur and curl around the hilltop. It will go straight through the community node, the northern portion of the site, which, as mentioned before, will be defined primarily by housing in yellows and orange colors. The hilltop will be adjacent to the active park off to the right side, and there will be a new trail connection into the community node from Larpenteur Avenue. The second view for the hilltop rotates us around the site and looks at the site from hovering over McKnight Road. So Maplewood neighborhoods are off to our right, and of course Hillcrest is directly in front of us. Here you see the McKnight Road frontage that I previously referenced and how it is shared between light industrial buildings, open space, and housing. It's important to note that the light industrial buildings are flexible buildings, and they will have a range of uses within them. They generally will be divided between distribution uses, production uses, and office uses. They generally would house stable companies, and they generally would have low barrier to entry living wage jobs. Port Authority will be developing all of the light industrial within the site, and they have a strong commitment to sustainability, particularly in the areas of stormwater and energy. These industrial buildings, the purple ones that you see in this drawing, we can assume the rooftops will be largely covered with solar arrays, which will help offset the energy costs throughout the rest of the development. So we're now going to rotate around the site, hovering over Winthrop Street. And the existing St. Paul neighborhoods are off to the right, and of course the hilltop scenario is directly in front of us. The new light industrial buildings in this scenario would be set back from Winthrop, and they would be set down a little bit lower due to site grading. They would be buffered from Winthrop Street and from the existing neighborhoods with a 50 or 60-foot green buffer along the side of Winthrop Street. The final view for the hilltop scenario will be taken from the Furness entrance to the site. So you can see in the foreground of this drawing, the top of the reservoir on the right-hand side. The new trail directly in front of or next to the reservoir would come straight from the existing Furness Trail. It would connect into the site, curl around the hilltop in the active park, and it would connect directly through the site all the way to McKnight. You can see some of the housing, the scale of the housing for the hilltop right around this area. So we have yellow buildings, medium density, roughly 3 and 4 stories to the left. And then as you move closer, move more to the interior of the site, the intensity of housing builds up to medium density or even higher density, which would be 5 and 6 stories. So now we are back from where we started, hovering above Larpenteur Avenue, and you can start to see how it all comes together. And you can also see on the left-hand side some of the statistics and the targeted numbers associated with this plan. So I mentioned earlier that one of the targets for the project is about 1,000 jobs and 1,000 households. So you can see in the upper left how the hilltop scenario comes up to about 750 or 800 jobs and about 1,200 households. We have about 24 acres of open space, and we have about, as mentioned before, about 1,100 or 1,200 units of housing. Now let's take a look at the jobs focused scenario. You'll see immediately some significant differences. The green spaces, for example, are not clustered around the hilltop, rather they are split with a green space to the north and a green space to the south. You'll also note that the western edge of the site is lined with housing. You see that in the yellow boxes and the yellow buildings in this drawing. So you'll also note that the spine road does, like the other scenario, it connects all the way from Larpenteur down to Ivy, but instead of swinging east, it swings west through the site. So now I'm going to take you through the same vantage points that we did on the previous scenario and talk about some of the features and some of the differences. The first one drops down to Larpenteur, as we did before. The entrance to the site slides in between two housing blocks and adjacent to the active park. This, like in the previous scenario, is the community node that would have a small amount of retail and restaurants. The spine road swings to the west, however, connecting all the way down to Ivy, and we'll see that in the next couple slides. Rotating around the site, we are now hovering on top of McKnight Road. You can see how in this scenario, the jobs focused scenario, we take a different approach to the McKnight Road frontage. Recognizing it for its value as an address for light industrial, this plan lines McKnight with about half of the plan's square footage of light industrial. The large block between Arlington in the foreground and Hoyt, several blocks up, is divided with a trail connection that bisects or goes in between two of the large industrial buildings. Rotating to the west and looking into the site, this time from above Winthrop, this scenario proposes a full block of housing on the western edge of the site. The housing would be similar in scale to what exists today on Winthrop, right across the street, and it would extend all the way from Montana down to the southern edge of the site to Ivy. And you see it in this drawing, you see the yellow buildings, which are new residential buildings lining the western edge of the site. The final vantage point, we rotate to the Furness Trail connection. Again, you see the top of the reservoir on the right-hand side, and a trail connection towards the community node, which is straight ahead of us in this image. Returning to the original position, we now see the full jobs-focused plan, as well as how it measures up quantitatively to some of the priorities and some of the targets discussed earlier. So in the jobs-focused scenario, we have approximately 1,000 jobs and 1,000 households. We have about 13.5 acres of open space, and we have about 900 units of housing. So now I have the plans up on the screen side by side, the hilltop to the left and the jobs focus to the right. We can look at them, compare them, and measure them up against each other quantitatively. It's also useful here to look at the two plans and discuss how they differ from each other and how they are similar. So they are similar in that they are both connected to the west with neighborhood extensions and Winthrop Avenue. While trucks will, it's important to note that while trucks will not traverse these streets, these neighborhood streets, we can assume a modest increase of traffic on neighborhood streets. It's important to note that the city will monitor this situation and would install traffic calming to maintain safety and reasonable speeds if necessary. Both of these plans address McKnight Road differently. The Hilltop Plan, as we mentioned earlier, shares its McKnight frontage with open space and housing, while the Jobs Focus Plan maximizes the frontage for light industrial, but shares it also with some open space. On the western edge of the Hilltop Plan, it's important to note that light industrial lines Winthrop Avenue, divided or buffered by a green buffer space. Whereas on the jobs focus scenario, the western edge of the site is lined with a full block of lower density housing. And then finally, for the Hilltop, as the name suggests, this plan preserves more of the existing topography. The hill is featured and it's embedded into the community node as a public space adjacent to the active park surrounded by housing. So we talked a lot about the physical aspects of the plan, land uses and its circulation. It's important to note that there are other aspects of the plan that will help it meet community needs. There will be a section on housing that will establish priorities for affordability. There will be a section on transportation that will define the streets in greater detail, their dimensions, where there will be on-street parking, and how wide the sidewalks and trails will be. And there will be a section on stormwater that describes how rainwater is managed and harnessed throughout the site. We know that in places it will be underground, and in other places it will be integrated into open space and in building setback areas. And of course, there will be a section on sustainability. And there likely will be other text sections as well, related to zoning flexibility, related to circulation, and other plan elements. So I'd like to conclude by going back to the schedule, the slide in front of you. You're invited to provide feedback on these two finalist plans. We will gather that feedback and develop a preferred scenario for the final recommended master plan, which will be developed in the coming months. Then the plan will be reviewed by Planning Commission, Parks Commission, and City Council, and there will be public hearings both at Planning Commission and the City Council starting in the fall. You're invited and encouraged to attend to exercise your voice. Immediately, however, there will be several avenues for giving feedback and getting more information. We will be hosting a live event online on March 16th. This will give you an opportunity to hear a similar presentation and to ask questions via an online meeting format. And we have set up a social pinpoint website that will enable you to comment directly on these approaches, putting your comments right on the two finalist scenarios. That website is listed here on the screen. We have also set up a survey to elicit feedback, which is also posted online on the Social Pinpoint website. So I encourage you to review these materials in depth and to get your questions answered, and then to give us your feedback through any of these methods, preferably by April 16th. Thank you for your interest in this exciting project. We look forward to hearing from you.